Okay, welcome to the study group. Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone at home. So we're excited to continue our study. We had a 3-part study on the teachings of Jesus as far as spiritual development. We started with born of the Spirit. Then we went into the kingdom of God is within you. And now we're finishing up with fear not, I will be with you, right?
That's right. So we're getting down into the psychological nitty-gritty here of what interferes with what we learned about in the first two, which is our fears, our anxieties, whatever that is about. We're all very familiar with these experiences that sometimes paralyze us even and stop us from doing what we know is right. So we're going to dig into this topic, and it's so reassuring to hear Jesus tell us, fear not, I will be with you.
Yeah.
So something about that companionship. And there's the story behind this artwork that Rembrandt did it's from the Bible, and it's got a little mixed up in the Bible. The Urantia book tells the same story. But in any case, Peter was having a dream. They were trying to make their way across the Sea of Galilee during a storm. And Peter, while he was dreaming, he became very afraid, and he called out to Jesus in his dream. And in his dream, he saw Jesus coming to him, walking on the water, which of course didn't actually happen. But psychologically, it was very important for Peter. And what Jesus said to Peter in his dream was, be of good cheer. It is I, be not afraid. And they say this was like the balm of Gilead to Peter's disturbed soul. So the balm of Gilead is like a cure-all. It's like this miraculous substance that was thought of as being a cure for all ailments. So that's a very interesting thing that they would say that. Anyway, so he cried out to the master, Lord, if it really is you, bid me come and walk with you on the water. So then Peter, in his dream, actually got up and tried to step into the water, right?
Right.
And of course, once he did that, he woke up and he stepped overboard into the water.
He woke up all right.
He certainly did. And when he awakened from his dream, Andrew, James, and John reached down and pulled him out. But in this drawing by Rembrandt, I think it's so kind of endearing how they picture this. Okay, here's Jesus. He really is going to pull him out of the water.
Yeah.
He's soothing his soul. So it occurred to me, this is like a really interesting, it's almost like a foreshadowing of the Spirit of truth, that Jesus in a form that's not quite physical is coming to teach and counsel and guide the souls of the apostles. And then, of course, us as well. As the time passed. So this dream, I don't know, I just think it's a very interesting dream, and that they would retell the story in the Urantia book. I think it's fascinating to try to make sure we get the clear story. But still, it's Jesus in spirit form coming to reassure Peter that I will be with you. Yeah. So I think that's very pertinent.
Yeah, it's important, I feel. I mean, we could go off for a long time talking about the importance of that dream and why they included it and everything like that. But I think, it's, as far as this lesson is related, I personally see it as that if you believe wholeheartedly with your heart what we talked about in the first two studies, then in a sense, there is no more fear because Jesus is with you. You know him now. You know that he's going with you. And so you can, quote unquote, walk on water, so to speak, and walk in the waters of faith.
Exactly. Yeah.
And he'll be there with you. So that's why I see this as such a wonderful progression of belief into faith, of recognition of the Spirit, choosing to blend with the Spirit, and then acting out in courage and faith of service, which is of the spiritual nature.
Exactly. Yeah. Finding the courage to believe in what we can't see, but knowing it's real.
Yeah.
So that's all this stuff about God and spirit and spiritual life. It's all wrapped up in that. Our capacity to sense and work with invisible presence, really. We'll talk more about that.
Yeah. Well, let me get into this first quote. We talk about dealing with fear. And this first quote, Jesus is speaking. He goes, "Fear not, I will be with you, and my spirit shall go before you into all the world. and my Father's presence will abide with you. And so it continues in this, or just further understanding of Jesus's philosophy or perspective, where it says in the Urantia book, his watchword was, fear not. His bravery was lofty and his courage often heroic. It was courage born of faith, not the recklessness of blind presumption. So in our current society, this recklessness of blind presumption is actually echoed as kind of courage in this might makes right type of society. And so here we're getting an example in Jesus's life of lofty courage, his heroic lofty courage, which was born of faith.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not of might.
Right. It's not like you're forcing outcomes. It's more like you're cooperating with a larger project.
An enhancement.
You're right. There's something going on in this world that's important. And there's celestial administration, there's unseen friends, there's higher purposes that maybe are not well known, but we have the opportunity to cooperate and work with those higher purposes, which does require courage oftentimes.
It does.
But there's a faith base for that courage. There's a knowing that something is right and good, and then committing to that, even though it may not look that way to everyone else. There's that interesting place we get into where, okay, I've got a higher vision here. I think something needs to happen.
Yeah, it's so personal.
Let me help.
Help, or I would also say, depending on where each person is, there's this, it's such a personal vision that sometimes we're asked to step out into faith.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we don't even know why we're being called to do what we're being called to do.
You have a sense for what the next thing to do is.
Sure, get a bit of a picture.
Yeah.
But you don't understand why.
You might have an inkling, but you don't have the full picture. But yet you still have the determination to go forward. And in that first bit there, it's interesting how they combined the idea of Jesus being with us with the Father's presence, also abiding with us.
Oh yeah, that first part.
Yeah. So in Urantia book terms, we learn, and this was actually in the first, in those first two parts we did, that there's the Spirit of the Father within us, but then there's the Spirit of the Son, or Jesus is who's been human, as a companion, and that these two spiritual influences, resources, work together for us. So that's a very powerful, to the extent that we can access these as spiritual resources, it can be very powerful.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let me continue on
Sure.
as far as accessing these spiritual resources and what it can get like for a believer. So here he's speaking, he says, believing the gospel will not prevent getting into trouble, but it will ensure that you shall be unafraid when trouble does overtake you. I do not promise to deliver you from the waters of adversity, but I do promise to go with you through all of them. And I think this is really important as far as understanding Jesus's support in our development, and as well as what Spirit asks us to do is in reflection to action, and that we can't get away from our choices and our decisions and the repercussions of our decisions and the experience of our actions and everything.
And also what's going on in the world around us.
Sure.
That we have no control over.
Sure. When evil does overtake you, so to speak.
Yeah, right. Unpredictable outcomes can happen sometimes.
But knowing that, Jesus is there with us, this powerful force is there with us, going through experiencing, and has experienced most of it as a human already.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's something that's comforting.
Very comforting.
And he goes on to say, or in another part, he talks about, in the coming kingdom, be not mindful of those things which foster your anxiety, but rather at all times concern yourselves only with doing the will of the Father who is in heaven.
So he's kind of saying the same thing again, but in different words.
Yeah.
This idea that we shouldn't allow our fears and anxieties to stop us, that we do have divine companionship. We are being watched over. And even if things go badly, those are memories we'll share with deity. we can hang around with Jesus later on. It's like, man, you remember the time XYZ?
Right,
man,
right.
Wasn't that a mess?
Well, he was also talking to the apostles here too, and saying, in the coming kingdom, be not mindful of those things which foster your anxiety. Yeah. Fully knowing the supreme challenges that they were about to be up against.
But right. They had some bad, some of them were even stoned to death. I mean, just the kind of things that they had to face in presenting this gospel.
So he was speaking to them personally. It speaks to us too.
But it does, yeah.
But also in the period of time of what they had to go through.
Well, that's what's so interesting about all of this. I mean, he was speaking to the apostles in a very intense way because of the intensity of what was going on at the time. But all of this is still totally relevant to us today. I mean, we don't know.
And into the future and for into the other planets.
Right.
So thanks, Jesus.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so as you are now developing through this curriculum a little bit, I kind of feel like this next quote really speaks to me personally. I feel like where Jesus speaks, even now you should begin to find deliverance from the bondage of fear and doubt as you enter upon the living of the new life of faith and hope. And when the feelings of service for your fellow men arise within your soul, do not stifle them. When the emotions of love for your neighbor well up within your heart, give expression to such urges of affection in intelligent ministry to the real needs of your fellows. And I feel like this so poetically illustrates the manifestation of what we've been talking about before this, the birth of the Spirit, the connection and identity with the Spirit, and the outward serving of the Spirit. And that it happens almost as he talks about when the feelings of service for your fellow men arise within your soul. So this is something that arises in your soul. And since this is a social friendly universe, nature that reflects that friendliness is really in accordance with reality.
Right. As there's a spiritual awakening that happens, he says, when we find deliverance from the bondage of fear and doubt. So again, we're learning, as if we didn't know already, that fear and doubt often stand in our way. They stand in our way, particularly in terms of what he's talking about here, where you have feelings for your fellows around you. You want to serve, you want to help. And, to not allow yourself to be paralyzed or discouraged, but to find deliverance.
Yeah. I like, give expression to such urges of affection in intelligent ministry to the real needs of your fellows.
Yes. I love all these qualifications.
Yeah, I like because it reminds me of how he taught. He could see the real needs, the deeper needs, the spiritual needs of the individual, and then speak to that.
Yeah, he went through a long period of his life before he even, put the apostles together, just doing personal ministry, traveling the world, just meeting all kinds of people and offering ministry to those in need as he met them. And they say that oftentimes it was more just the other person having the opportunity to talk to him, confide in him, that would have a tremendous effect. Or sometimes even just a smile. Yeah, would transform people.
Them dumping their soul's worries on him that he could take. Right.
Just that he could receive that and understand that, and then maybe offer a little advice. But he saw people in terms of their future fulfillment of their true nature. I mean, we have no idea about our actual destiny as in the universe over eternity, but he could see that.
Yeah, I guess we tend to have, and this kind of leads into what you're talking about, we have a tendency sometimes in this society to see, is the effort worth the payoff?
Yes.
What is in return?
It's always a deal.
Sure. Well, while Jesus looks and sees our potential and says, okay, wow, you're valuable, so I want to serve. I want to help you too and get you there. I believe in you. For us, sometimes we always see, what's the value that I can get out of it? So then I'll put forth the effort to help and do things of a more friendly nature, instead of seeing the value in them like Jesus, or even seeing the value in serving spiritually.
Right.
Just doing that.
Yeah. The value is in the service, and it's in the expression of love, because when you give love to another, you find that love within yourself, and that just creates a whole new frame for the reality, not just of that moment, but for circumstances going forward. To have those kind of precedents in memory where,
Right.
wow, it really felt good to help that person. You know, you find something in yourself that maybe you didn't even know was there, you know, a spiritual nature.
Yeah. And it's reflective of, I would say, like a higher society where people are doing that. We're so animalistic, you know, we have all these kind of primitive fears and anxieties built into us that we're trying to move past. We did that study on the vestigial traits.
Exactly.
Because we knew that was the first study group we did, because we knew how important that stuff is.
Right. And this is almost part 2 in a sense.
Right.
Of that, because one of our biggest vestigial traits is this legacy of fear. So let me go on with this next couple of quotes here. So I think this is really interesting. We're going to kind of just talk about fear for a few minutes.
Right.
You know, what is fear? Where does it come from? What purpose does it serve? Does it have evolutionary significance? How do we mitigate it? How do we work with it? So in this first quote, they're talking about dawn mammals, which are actually not even human yet. These are evolutionary predecessors to the human race. And they say here that being small of stature and having keen minds. So these are smart animals, kind of like our kitty here. I don't know if you can see him. But being of small stature and having keen minds to realize the dangers of their forest habitat, the dawn mammals developed an extraordinary fear, which led to those wise precautionary measures that so enormously contributed to survival. The beginning of the fear tendencies of mankind more specifically date from these days. So they're clearly telling us that this type of fear is part of our animal legacy. So we evolved from animals with a plan, of course, to become God-knowing. But we carry with us, you know, these vestigial traits, these tendencies, these animal tendencies. And one of them is this particular type of fear. But then they go on to explain something here that I think is really, really fascinating. I haven't even really been aware of this until just preparing for this, actually. They go on to point out that what they call common fear was physiological in origin. And this includes fear of physical pain, unsatisfied hunger, some earthly calamity, you know, fear of death even, anything that involves our physical well-being. There's this whole category of fears around that.
Okay.
But ghost fear was a new and sublime sort of terror. So in the Urantia book, they talk about ghost fear as being, you know, one of the most important influences in the civilization of human beings, in the evolutionary development socially of humans. And this ghost fear is something that we don't share with animals. Animals don't visualize life after death. They don't have dreams about, you know, Kitty doesn't have dreams about cats he's known, you know, or whatever. But this ghost fear, this was a new and sublime sort of terror. So what we're going to learn here is that this has tremendous evolutionary significance. And now they're already saying that the physiologic fear contributed enormously to the survival of these animals, who eventually led to species that, you know, that we evolved from.
Right.
So we can see how important that was. Okay, so they go on to talk about this in the next slide here in a little more detail. They say that the dread of the departed spirits of the dead brought to light a new and amazing form of fear, an appalling and powerful terror. I mean, listen to this language. This senseless superstition, some of which still persists, prepared the minds of men and women, of course, through superstitious fear of the unreal and the supernatural for the later discovery of, quote, the fear of the Lord, which is the beginning of wisdom. So that's from ancient scripture. The baseless fears of evolution are designed to be supplanted by the awe for deity inspired by revelation. So this fear of something that isn't actually real prepared our minds for the recognition of something that is real, but is in sort of the same category of not being physical, if that makes sense.
It reminds me a little bit of how we're always looking for like a celestial administration in the planetary plane,
sure,
something like that.
Yeah. Let me just go ahead and read the next one just to kind of complete this train of thought here. So they go on to say that evolution unerringly achieves its end. It imbues man with that superstitious fear of the unknown and dread of the unseen, which is the scaffolding for the God concept. In executing those decisions which deliver you from the fetters of fear, you literally supply the psychic fulcrum on which the adjuster, which is the Spirit of God within us, may subsequently apply a spiritual lever of uplifting and advancing illumination. So fetters, I had to look up fetters. Fetters are like chains. That, when they put manacles and chains on your ankles in prison, those are what fetters are. So that's a powerful image there. And they're saying that we can find deliverance from our fetters of fear through decisions. So we have the power in our mind to recognize that these things we're afraid of, So what they're mapping out are two categories of fear. This is the big takeaway for me. There's physical fear, there's fear of not being able to make the rent, there's fear of getting run over by a car, there's, all these kind of physical fears that have to do with our material life. But then there's this whole other category of fear, which is like metaphysical. It's like, what they used to call floating anxiety back in the 1950s. I remember that, or 60s. Or just the dread and panic that can just rise up out of nowhere. I mean, I've experienced that. I remember that one day I was just getting ready to go out and do something, and just this feeling of dread came up in me. And it's like, where's this coming from? What is this? And I really had to stop and say, no, I'm not going to go there.
Unreasoned fear.
Yeah, unreasoned fear. There's no basis for it. I wasn't specifically afraid of any particular outcome.
It's part of the Urantia intellectual mind fraud.
Right, exactly. It was just that something that is in our circuitry, so to speak. But to learn that this actually has an evolutionary purpose. So if you think about ghost fear in particular, they say that the ghost dream is the origin of the concept of the supermaterial phase of human selfhood. I mean, that's so important. So when these savages would have ghost dreams, like they would dream of relatives who had died, that gave them the idea that, well, maybe they're still around. Maybe they're still alive.
There's something more.
Yeah, right. And it scared them to death.
Sure.
But it introduced the idea that there's something supermaterial about us. That we can imagine or begin to conceptualize something about us and about reality that's not physical. So the fear of invisible presence that is represented by ghost fear has led us to the place where we can have a love and recognition for the invisible presence of God. So it's kind of like this training that we have to go through as human beings, as a species, and also as individuals, to some extent. Our introduction to real invisible presence, like with God, like with the Spirit of Truth, like with Jesus, like with angels, you name it, is, we first encounter that possibility through our fears, or at least as a species, of ghosts.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, which I think is just fascinating.
It also reminds me of how we start our prayer life, kind of, or the idea of an alter ego, or at least some kind of divine presence, through when children are with their imaginary friends.
Imaginary friends are a big part of that too. Yeah, that's more benign.
And it's less ghost and less horror. It's more of a friendly association.
Sure. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a big thing with, especially kids. The first, I remember with my kids, Angie was the first, and she just had a whole committee of imaginary friends. I mean, the other two kids had her to hang out with, so they not so much.
She had so many imaginary friends. the siblings hung out with some of the leftover imaginary friends.
Exactly. So it was a big thing we would always laugh about. But that's a very interesting psychological angle, preparation for this idea of God being real. We can have a friendship with God, and God is real, but invisible.
And God is a friend.
God is a friend.
Right. So if you want to continue.
Yeah, let me just go ahead and finish up these last couple. So now we're getting into anxiety. So there's major fears, but then we also deal with anxiety. And I know so many friends and people I'm close to who struggle with anxiety. I've struggled with it myself. And they tell us here that anxiety was a natural state of the savage mind. When men and women fall victims to excessive anxiety, they're simply reverting to the naturalist state of their far distant ancestors. So again, this is part of our makeup, but it has an evolutionary purpose in terms of awakening us in certain ways. But now its usefulness has run its course, and we have to dismiss it. We have to have an understanding in our mind and make, like I said before, make those decisions which drive these things away from us. They just get canceled, so to speak, as no longer being real because they're about things.
They get worked out.
Yeah, they get worked out. So they're talking about Jesus here. They say what he preached against was not forethought, but anxiety and worry. So forethought is a good thing. If you have stuff coming up you need to anticipate and plan for, you want to make sure you got enough gas to get where you're going, that's great. But if you got enough gas to sit in your car driving there worrying about whether you're going to make it or not, that's pointless because it distracts your mind from the creative and constructive possibilities.
It's like the only...
that the Spirit is trying to... Yeah.
Right. And it's reflective of Jesus, the only time where he really speaks to the negative. Because he's always like, do good, and don't worry about that thou shalt not stuff.
Right.
But he kind of spares that for like the really pointless things.
Right.
Like, no, really, just
exactly.
Don't go there. Don't even go there.
Yeah, right. And then this last piece from the book where they say anxiety must be abandoned. I remember when I first read that, I just went like, what? I didn't know that was possible. Why did anybody tell me this? This should be like third grade or something. You can abandon the idea that you can abandon your anxieties. I mean, to me, that was like a huge revelation psychologically. And as we study these spiritual topics, we learn over and over again the intimate connection between the spiritual and the psychological, that they're like almost hand in hand. And our spiritual growth depends a lot on making progress psychologically and self-mastery.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking about how, a lot of this like psychoanalysis or people who need to get like psychotherapy, how much of it can be abandoned.
Right.
And how much of it are they just looking for some kind of institutional
authority? There's a whole industry built up on trying to mine our anxieties.
Well, we're looking for permission from some sort of authority. And here we are starting this study about transferring your seat of identity from your mind worrying to the eternal.
Right. To our soul.
Yeah. And that in itself starts to defrag the computer and starts to abandon certain anxieties as well.
Yeah.
But how much, I just wonder, if society had more of a focus on these types of spiritual processes, how much, maybe pharmaceutical medicines might go away, or psychological evaluations that cost a ton of money might go away.
Right.
Things like that.
Right. Learning that we can control all of this through decisions.
Yeah.
Our mind is a powerful tool. We learned in one of the other segments about how your mind should be our powerful ally.
Right.
Our mind should be working for us. Our mind doesn't have a mind of its own. It's like, it's a tool that we've been given and we just need to learn how to use it.
Well, that's the beauty of having revelation, is that you see there is intelligent design in life itself.
Yes.
And so there's a plan.
Right.
And you understand origin, history, and destiny. Especially the destiny understanding, that the whole picture really helps.
Yes, it does.
And when sometimes in common society, we can get caught up in everything's just a big bang accident and nothing has any real reason or purpose or whatever. So then it's hard to really get on board with reality.
That's a demoralizing
it is.
Sophistry that's current in, a large part of our culture.
Well, it's like telling a child you have no parents or something like that.
Right.
You feel abandoned and then there's no direction.
Right.
And then here's Jesus knowing that was going to happen. And he sent the Spirit of truth. Right. To show the way, even like spiritual reparenting, so to speak, but not.
Yeah. And then to learn that some of our fears, particularly our metaphysical fears, actually can be converted into a stimulus to become aware of God, that's their purpose. So instead of feeling helpless and by, being laid low by our mental states because we feel like we have no control or command over these things that go on within us, we can look at those in a new way and realize that they actually have an evolutionary purpose if we take command within ourselves and say, okay, I'm going to bounce off this. I'm going to use this capacity to recognize non-material reality as a way to get traction with my consciousness of God.
Yeah, that's good advice for self-ministry. And if you're out there doing ministry, take note.
Yeah.
Also, that this is a way of connecting with an individual that can give them the self-respect and confidence and courage to abandon that anxiety and remind them what reality is in the spiritual world, and
redirect those mental energies. I mean, that's one of the biggest issues with anxiety and all these fears, is that they're a distraction. They take away, they usurp our constructive potential, our potential for having new understanding and thinking about things, using our mind constructively and positively all the time, including our communion with deity. Yeah. So anything that distracts from that is something that we really need to be on the alert for, and just set up the guards at the gate.
Yeah. Well, anxiety takes away from peace,
It does.
Jesus works on peace. He leaves his peace. He gives his peace. He comes in peace. He goes in peace.
Exactly.
He is the man of peace.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads me into this next one where he talks about the peace of Jesus. Then the peace and assurance of a son who fully believes that his career for time and eternity is safely and wholly in the care and keeping of an all-wise, all-loving, and all-powerful Spirit Father. And this is, indeed, a peace which passes the understanding of mortal mind, but which can be enjoyed to the full by the believing human heart. And I love how this kind of wraps it back up to Jesus always instructing his apostles to hear and listen with their heart.
Yes.
Not with their mind.
Right.
Because this, again, can be enjoyed in full in the believing human heart, even though it surpasses what our mind can understand.
Right.
The peace of Jesus does.
We may not comprehend it, but we can experience it and feel it. And it's tied in with this full, wholehearted belief that our future going into eternity is safely in the keeping of powers beyond ourselves that are benign, benevolent, and have a higher purpose for us, and a higher calling, and a higher path, and adventures and outcomes of a divine and wonderful nature that we can hardly even begin to imagine. So feeling cared for, feeling held, feeling, all those feelings of comfort and assurance that the Spirit brings, those are real.
Yeah, and I will say that you don't learn a lot of this until you go out there and learn it by earning the scars. It's like someone could tell you that God is real and lives in you, and you can agree, but that's still an intellectual agreement. That's still a mind thing, and it takes living and acting and doing.
Right.
And then the reflection of that experience with your knowledge of learning about this stuff, knowing that God was with you the whole time or whatever, then you gain the wisdom that really allows that insight, that spiritual insight for an individual as they traverse through life, I feel.
Exactly. We can reality test.
Yeah.
We first learn about these things in the mind, like you're saying, almost in theory, maybe theological or a philosophical idea that sounds good. But until you reality test it in the laboratory of your own experience, then when you do that, then it becomes real. It creates memories too that you can look back on for encouragement going forward. So there's a building of a sense of the reality of spirit that takes place over time, but only through experience, like you're saying.
Absolutely. It's real and it's free. And
it's free. Yeah, we don't need a password to log on.
Right. And I feel like that kind of leads us into our last slide.
Yeah, okay. Let me hit this last one. So here's Jesus again. He says, freely you have received this gospel of the kingdom, what we're talking about, all these reassurances of faith and sonship and all of that. Freely you have received this gospel of the kingdom, and you will freely give the good news to all nations. Fear not the resistance of evil, for I am with you always, even to the end of the ages. And my peace I leave with you.
I love when he says that.
Yeah. Yeah. Even to the end of the ages. So there's a hint here of what we, of course, learn in the Urantia book about the nature of Jesus as a creator son, a paradise creator son, that will be associated with him through eternity. He's going to be by our side. He's there for us all the way through this life, but then beyond into eternity as well. So we're just now developing this relationship of profound significance.
Right. And what a great opportunity to start now where we are in such lowly creatures. So take advantage if you can.
Get to know him, get to trust him and depend on him, love him and everything else. And then that all is guided by the Spirit of the Father. The Spirit of God lives within us. So it's again, this sort of divine conspiracy.
Yeah. And a rapport that we can grow actively and make the choice to grow that.
Right.
Those friendships that can be built now, the rapport is something that we can look back on and build on and draw strength from.
Right.
From past experience into eternity throughout ages and ages.
And if we come to know others who are also working with these ideas and working with these experiences, that creates a really strong bonding on a human level.
Absolutely.
And we become like this, I don't know.
The crew, the unseen kingdom.
What they call the core of the finality.
The core of finality, the unseen brotherhood.
Yeah, the invisible brotherhood, exactly. Yeah, it's a wonderful thing.
Well, that's what we're doing here. And I appreciate doing this and going over this study with you, Chuck. Great work. Appreciate all your hard work.
Likewise.
And thank you guys for joining us. And we look forward to having more studies. So does Kitty. And God bless. Thanks, Chuck. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Derek. See everybody on the next one.
All right.